Hi, welcome to .NET Core tutorial. In this video, we will discuss about logging in .NET Core. .NET Core supports the logging API that works with variety of built-in and third-party logging providers. .NET Core uses the create default builder method, which is in the program.cs class of your project, to add the logging providers for console, debug, event source, and event log for Windows. We'll discuss more about these login providers in a bit. To create the logs, we use generic version of iLogger interface from the dependency injection. So we mentioned the logging configurations in app settings.json. Also, if you have any environment specific configuration for the logging, then those can be mentioned as part of app settings dot your environment.json file. Let's understand this in better way. Let's switch to Visual Studio. I have created MEC application. So we have one controller called home controller and we have associated views. I have discussed the folder structure in my previous video. In this video, I have covered the MEC folder structure. I will give the URL in the description. Let me go to program.cs. So create default builder is responsible for configuring all the login providers. When no configuration is mentioned for login providers, the create default builder will load all the built-in login providers for console, debug, event source, and event log. Apart from that, we have a couple more login providers we will discuss in a bit. So let me run the application. Now our application is hosted. Now let me switch to Visual Studio. So if you observe the output window, you can see that a lot of information being shown in the debug window of the output. So you can see that IS Express has few entries in the debug window. Apart from that, there are a couple of other information from Microsoft hosting lifetime, and there are few more from the threading. So there are a lot of information with related to the our application. So if you notice this, it has been shown that isexpress.exe. So that's because currently our project doesn't have any hosting model. So whenever ASP.NET Core hosting model is not mentioned, the Visual Studio will consider it as an in-process hosting model. So let me stop the application and add ASP.NET Core hosting model to be out of process. So for that, I will add ASP.NET Core hosting model as out of process. And now I will run the application. Now if you observe the debug window, you can see that the information now flowing is from loggingcore.exe. That's because since we have changed our ASP.NET Core hosting model to out of process, that means that now instead of IS Express, our Visual Studio is hosting using Kestrel server. I have discussed in great detail about the hosting models in ASP.NET Core. This is a video where I have explained about hosting in .NET Core. I will be providing the link in the description. Please go through if you are new to the hosting model in ASP.NET Core. Now you have understand that ASP.NET Core is able to provide your login capabilities in the debug mode. Remove this line. I want this to be an in-process hosting model. So as I mentioned earlier, in order to use the logging, we use the iLogger generic instance. So you can see that the generic T has been replaced by our home controller, and the dependency injection takes the responsibility of creating an instance for this iLogger. So let me go to app settings.json. Here we have mentioned the log levels for each of the category. So the default represents to our current executing project. So that is for login core. So Microsoft and Microsoft Hosting Lifetime are the categories for which the information needs to be logged by using the iLogger. And these are the warning and information are the log levels which we will discuss in a bit. So here also you can mention that what kind of log levels needs to be used by the debug, console and other logging providers. So if you want to configure a particular logging provider for your application, you can do that in program.cs file. For create default builder has an extension method called configure logging. So you can use this configure logging. You can use this configure logging to register your login providers. So I will do that quickly. Logging. So by using logging dot, you can add your own specific login provider which you want. For the time being, I need all the default login providers. So I'm not using any particular login provider for this video tutorial. So let me remove this part of code. So now let's understand what all the login providers available in ASP.NET Core. So first one is the console. So this console will add all the information in your command prompt from where your application is being hosted. Next one is the debug method. This is responsible for adding the logs to your output window in Visual Studio. So like that, similarly, we have event source, which will add all the logging information in your event source. And the event log is an particular only for Windows where you can log your all your information and the logging can be done to event log. Azure related logging service files, we have service blobs, then we have application insights. So these are all the logging providers which are provided by the .NET Core. Now let's understand what are the available log levels in ASP.NET Core. So first one is the trace, then debug, then information and warning, error and critical, and then it comes null. These are the in the ascending order of their priority. In app settings.json, if I mention that my default will have only information, then all the information logged by my application will be included only those information which are above log level information. That is only information, warning, error, and critical will be included as part of logging. If there are any other logs which are done by my application in the category of trace and debug, then these will not be included as part of logging. In order to understand this, let's switch to Visual Studio and make some code. So I will keep information as it is and Microsoft and information log levels for them as it is. So let me go to home controller and add few lines of coding over here. So for that, I will do logger dot. So log information method is responsible for logging your information related logs. So in this, I will add few lines. This is an log information logger. So let me add this is a message from log information. So let me copy this message. Log warning is responsible for logging your warning message. So let me edit the message to point it to log warning. Now I will add log critical. Now here, this is responsible for logging your an error message. So now we are left with the logger trace. So for that I will use log trace method. So now let me run the application. Now my application is hosted. Let's switch to Visual Studio and see what are the log information has been logged in output window. So you can see that now my application is hosted using IIS Express since I have moved from out of process core hosting model. So apart from that, you can see that I have a home control login mechanisms. Login informations have been logged over here. If you notice that I have information warning, critical, and error logs only. But if you go to home controller and observe the method, let me drag a little bit down. So if you see that I have logged all the six informations, log information, log warning, log critical, log error, log debug, and trace. But if you observe the logged information, you can see only the information warning, critical, and error. That is because we have mentioned in app settings.json that my default project will have only information. Now let me add since we are using debug, so let me add a debug login provider settings for you over here. So for that, I will use debug login provider. So I will mention debug. So inside this, I will mention what are the log levels needs to be used for in debug mode. So for that, I will just copy paste the same thing and I will mention over here. So from information, I will make it to trace. And if you observe the home controller, it still have all the login providers login logs. If you observe here, it has all the login providers. So let me run the application. Now my application is hosted. Let me switch to Visual Studio. So if you observe this particular section in the login provider in outputs, if you observe this particular section in the output, you can see that now the trace and debug has been logged inside a debug mode. If you observe this particular selected section, you will be able to see now the logs from debug and trace. Now, if I want to make a particular sections and particular category for the home controller and some other methods, some other class for. Now, let me make few more changes to my class. Now, let me make few more changes to my application. I will add one interface and one class which will inherit from this interface. Let me explain you the changes what I have done. So I have added one class counter and one interface. So this interface has the declaration for method called increase counter, and here is the class which inherits it. So I have injected the ilogger over here for this class, and in this increase counter I'm logging the information. I will call this method in my home controller. So let me inject the dependency over here. For that I will use iCounter. So let me create a private field for that. And let me use this one to call the method counter dot increase counter. Now this will be this method will be called and the logs will be generated in the debug mode. So let me clear the logs. Now let me run the application. Okay, I have an exception over it. That's because home controller is not able to inject the instance for iCounter. So let me clear this exception. For that, what I need to do, I need to go to my startup.cs file and register for my dependency injection. So I have covered the dependency injection in my previous video. Please go through it. So I will use add scoped one. So I will use iCounter slash counter. Now the issue should be resolved. So let me run the application one more time. Now notice that my application is hosted correctly. So let me switch to Visual Studio. Now you can see this particular selected section. There are around 12 logs over here. One, 6 logs are coming from the counter class, which includes information, warning, critical, error, debug, and trace. And next section of logs are coming from the home controller, which also includes all the logs which I have provided. Now consider a scenario where you might be needing only the logs which are coming from home controller which are above information, and you might need all the logs which are coming from counter from trace and above. So for this we need to copy this category and let me paste this category in notepad so that I can use it in future. So let me stop the application. For this I need to add this particular category in my app settings.json file. So for this I will mention I need only information and above logs. So let me run the application. Now my application is hosted. Let me switch to Visual Studio. If you observe this particular section, my all the logs are available which are logged in by counter class. Whereas if you notice my controller logs, it has only the logs which are above information log level. That's all as part of this video tutorial. Thank you.